Everybody, how's it going? Andrew here. And I just wanted to say real quick, if you could do me a huge favor and all of us here on the Indie Game Movement podcast, and that is just to write a review or rate the show. One of the two, whatever works for you. It would mean the world to us. That information, the review, the feedback, so helpful to know if we're on the right track, if we're doing things that you really like about this show, if we're covering the right content, the right guests, whatever it may be. All that's helpful. Not only that, the reviews, the ratings, those are all helpful in terms of discoverability so we can do better on the platforms that we're on, wherever you're listening. If you could just take a moment, write a review, it would absolutely mean the world to us, and just a small little way that you can help and do your part as a listener to make sure other people are finding out about the podcast, are learning and getting the great, helpful content that you are also receiving just by listening. So again, take a moment whenever you can, write a review, rate the show. It would mean the world to us. So thank you so much for being such great listeners. And now let's get right to the show. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'm going to be your host today, and we're going to be talking about unveiling the benefits of diversity in the games industry. Diversity takes many shapes. In addition to differences in identity, diversity should encompass a difference in thought, background, experience, and skills. The games industry is experiencing a movement toward expanding and deepening our understanding of diversity, and it's definitely an important conversation we need to have. So in today's episode, we'll be discussing the value of diversity, how to avoid making mistakes with the best intentions, and the benefits it has for all devs and studios. Not to mention how having an open mind can create all sorts of opportunities. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey everybody, how's it going? And we're back today with Dr. Jakin Vela. Jakin, how's it going, my bud?
Hey, it's going. It is going. July is picking up, and really the summer is picking up.
Yeah, we're definitely in the heat of it, that's for sure.
Yes, Dallas, Texas heat particularly.
Yes, we were talking about that previously to the interview, how hot it is there, how hot it is here in the Northeast, and just all the craziness in terms of weather, rain. Hopefully, whoever you are and you're getting all those things, that you're safe, you're doing well. But we're here with Jakin to have some really interesting conversations. But first, for those of you who aren't familiar, Jakin is the executive director of IGDA. He's a sociologist, which means, he has a PhD in sociology with a focus, this is really cool, on games and game developers. In addition to that, he's a founder and CEO of a couple companies. One is Astral Interactive. It's an indie game studio focused on engaging player empathy and gameplay and narratives. So cool. And then the other one is Magitech, Management Solutions, and that is a project and process efficiency consulting firm, which helps small businesses leverage how to no-code technology and systemize their operations and better manage their people and projects. So that is also really awesome. And then on top of that, you're an arts-based researcher and singer-songwriter focused on representing qualitative data through music and lyrics. That is super insightful.
Thank you. I picked that up during my sociology PhD.
Wow,
I've always been a singer-songwriter, but I matched science and art with I fused them together, and I am arts-based research. Yeah,
it's like, AI, eat your heart out, because this is all organic being done by a human.
Yes, absolutely. Though an AI model probably could do what I do too, which is also a little scary.
So you're involved with a lot and everything. So when you do have some downtime, what do you like to do?
Downtime. What is downtime really? What is that these days? I feel like we live in a society, at least here in the US, where we try and capitalize on our downtime to like make extra money or to turn things into like a side gig because that's just how a lot of folks work. But aside from trying to turn all my passions into like some sort of revenue generating stream so I can live on this earth, I have recently gotten into a few things like dancing and learning, really getting into electronic music. I've always liked electronic music, but during my time in Brazil, I went out to a lot of like nightclubs and like dance clubs, and I just realized how much I love to like vibe with electronic music. So now I'm going to learn some like maybe how to DJ. I think that's super interesting. I have a music background, but I've never like DJ'd before. But I feel like I can envision myself staying up till 10 a.m. like playing a set of just awesome pumped up music. And then also coding. I don't have a technology-based background, except in like maybe cybersecurity, but that's kind of like a different subject. But yeah, coding. I've always kind of put off programming. So that's something I've been kind of doing on my downtime as well. Clearly, I like to learn in my downtime. I'm like a lifelong student.
Nice. Well, those are some really interesting things there. And I feel like offline, we're going to have to chat sometime about some electronic music because I like all kinds of music, but electronic is one that I really vibe to, especially biking. Big fan of progressive trance.
Yeah.
But anyways, we'll easily get off topic if we start talking about that stuff.
In gaming, of course. Like that's probably obvious, but gaming is, of course, like the biggest one.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that. And hey, folks, just want to let you know too that Jakin also has a special offer for you guys today. So please hang out to the end, and you can find out what that is. It's a really good deal, and it's only for listeners of IGM. So again, stay tuned to the end, which I'm pretty sure you will. But just a reminder. That said, Jakin, let's get right into this conversation. But of course, and I'm sure all of you are familiar, before we do that, we got to go into the Q Box round. So are you ready for the Q Box round?
I am ready for the Q Box. What is the Q Box round?
Well, for those of you who aren't familiar, along with our guests here today, it's just a series of random questions that we have prepared for you to just see how good you are on the fly, kind of on the fly. I know there's some prep involved with this. We all know that, right?
Yeah.
But okay.
No, that sounds good. So
all right.
I'm ready for it.
Excellent. So what is your most influential or aspiring game?
Yes. So I did have a few thoughts on this, but after more thought, I would say Final Fantasy 14, which is actually a more recent one. So in 2013, it was the first major MMO I played with my spouse, and he got me into to MMO games and played it together, and it really helped me during a difficult period in my life. I was getting my master's, I was figuring out what my next steps in life were, and I built this amazing LGBT inclusive community in the game, and it grew so big, and we had this family now on the game. So that game has probably had the biggest impact, and I have the most attachment to it just kind of when I think about games. But before then, way back in the day, I'd say Diablo 1, Fable, all of these classic games really impacted me and kind of pushed me to where I am today.
That's awesome. And I love it when you have those gaming experiences that you attach to real life events and stuff. It just makes those games so much more impactful and everything. So that's awesome. Thank
Absolutely.
You for sharing.
Yeah. And that's actually the basis of my sociological study of games is how games impact society and developers and gamers, etc.
Cool stuff. All right. What's one major thing that you would want to accomplish in your lifetime?
Major thing. So I'll make this one fun. I want to dance well, a hip hop set or a K-pop set or something like that. Learn this routine and choreography and nail it and be the best dancer on the stage for that routine. That would be like a highlight of my life.
Well, that sounds like an awesome one to strive for, and I feel like you will do it. So
I feel like I can. I feel like I got it in me.
Yeah.
I just have to like learn how to move my body like that.
Yeah. You'll get there. I know it. All right. And last but not least is, what game are you playing now?
That's a great one. So the game, I always am playing like Guild Wars 2 and Final Fantasy 14 when I have time to like log in and make sure my house isn't demolished or something by the auto demolition. But aside from those games, the other one I'm playing right now is Tears of the Kingdom, but I've only put in like an hour in it.
Okay.
So, but I love it. I loved Breath of the Wild. I know I'm going to love Tears of the Kingdom. So yeah, that's pretty much the only one I'm playing right now because just time.
Yeah, no, agree. But you know what? Even with I've been playing that sparingly here and there. But man, I keep getting all these like news updates about all the crazy things people are creating, which is it's awesome. So that alone is a lot of fun. But anyways, glad that you're having some time here and there to play. So cool.
I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that information. Lots of cool things to get to know you a little bit more. But let's get into our discussion today. And again, folks, this is Unveiling the Benefits of Diversity in the Games Industry. And honestly, I can't think of a better person to talk about this than Dr. Jakin here. So
thank you.
So with that said, let's kick things off with, how do you define diversity as it relates to the industry, and why is it important?
That is such a big question. And
it is.
And I have to say, like, the answers I give here, like, I thank you so much for the kind words. There are so many voices and thought leaders on the topic of industry diversity. And so for any listener, like, when you hear my words today, I'm one contributor to that. So please always, like, as a sociologist and researcher, I always have to say, like, get as much information as you can from as many sources and really pile it together. But for me, diversity is really all about, differences. Like, what are we bringing to the table, and how are our unique perspectives and lived experiences and ideas, the culmination of all of these unique aspects of ourselves and the intersecting identities that we carry and we put out into this world, how does that contribute to like a culmination of community of ideas? The industry itself is a large community, and it's a global community. We are a global industry. When we think of diversity, we have to think of things not just like in the US, commonly diversity is often focused around like, race, gender, sexual orientation, class, disability. But there are a lot of other aspects of diversity, such as, where you grew up, how you grew up, cultural customs, regional differences, so many aspects. And then when you take a global perspective, sometimes those aspects of diversity look a little different in each region or in each country. Like when we're talking about like diversity of race and ethnicity in the U.S., it's going to look a little different when we talk about diversity of race and ethnicity in, say, Finland or Brazil. And there's a lot of cultural, geopolitical elements that go into play. But yeah, sorry, I'm like giving a sociological answer. I'll like reel it back and say, to me, diversity is about the unique aspects of our lives that make us who we are. And, for me, I hold a lot of different identities personally. I'm Mexican American. I identify as openly gay. I identify as spiritual, not religious, like super spiritual. I grew up a working poor class. So all of these aspects of my life, I have disabilities. Often they're deemed like invisible disabilities. I have extreme carpal tunnel, which prevents me from doing a lot of things that I would really love to do. A few other things, but yeah, all of these things make me who I am. And I bring that unique experience to the workplace, to the creative idea table, to all of these things. And that's not just me, that's everybody. And I think that's what is so important, is that the more we acknowledge diversity in the industry, the more doors we open to new stories, to new ideas, to new experiences, and the more connections we can make to people around the world who also share those similar identities, those similar experiences. And I don't know, I just think that really does make the industry and the world a better place when we value that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? Honestly, I am glad you gave both your other response and your sociological one, only because it really is important to lay those things out, because oftentimes, because of some of these concepts or how everybody might think of things differently, there are some mainstream ways of thinking about these things, which I think can potentially lead to sometimes mistakes and pitfalls. So I'm curious then, with that in mind, like, what are some common mistakes you think that people make when they are prioritizing diversity in whatever capacity? Let's say, obviously, along the lens of the industry.
Yeah, so I think one of the most common ones is really just having a very narrow focused definition of diversity. Of course, diversity, especially in our context, includes diversity of race, gender, disabilities, etc.
Right.
But like I had mentioned, it's an expansive word. It's an expansive definition, and when we're closed off to really focused only on diversity of maybe like one identity, we can forget that there are multiple intersecting identities as well. So the IGDA recently released a paper on a diversity report paper that really talked about these differences, because there are differences, like not just between like men and women in the industry, but men of color and compared to white men, or white women compared to women of color. And so when we kind of intersect these identities, we see a little bit more of the nuanced experience of our communities. And that's important. And I think people often forget the importance of intersecting identities, or intersecting or an intersectional diversity, really. Additionally, I think also people forget that diversity can kind of mean different things in different contexts. Like I like to frame, oftentimes when I talk about diversity, I'm talking about it in a like U.S. or North American context that typically applies to a particular, our particular region, and that can look a little different when you kind of take that lens to a different region, and you really have to incorporate, like I mentioned, like geopolitical issues or other aspects into our definition or analysis of what diversity means. So kind of going back, I think people have a narrow definition, or it's like one thing, like, just race or just gender, a lack of intersectional, and then also just a very non-global definition. I think there's a lot of that. As a global industry, we really need to consider the global impact of our framework and our lens that we use when we discuss these important topics. Let's see, other pitfalls. I think tokenism is one. Like, another thing, when people are like gung-ho about diversity, they can get trapped into this like idea of getting meeting quotas, or getting like a certain number of a particular person or people with a particular identity. And that really isn't always helpful, because that kind of overshadows the more systemic issues of what makes being diverse, what challenges to making a diverse industry or a diverse workplace. Just doing quotas or getting token folks to fill in the role, that doesn't really solve your diversity issues, because diversity issues often stem internally, structurally, from your policies, from your culture. But yeah, I won't get too far into that, but
I mean, I'll call out to one in particular, because I mean, and this is my own way of, I guess, experiencing it. But a couple of years ago with the whole Black Lives Matter movement, it was tricky because it was something I was very much wanting to support and amplify and everything, but at the same time, you see a lot of people joining that bandwagon. And I'm not trying to downplay this here, but it's just like, and I'm talking about not just people, but entities. And then you start questioning, what is the real intent here? and some of these objectives. And then you have other people like myself, they're like, hey, I want to help support this. But if I see others where it seems like their intent isn't as genuine as you would like it to be or should be, then it might now question my positioning on how I want to support those things, because I don't want to be viewed as, someone who is trying to ride that bandwagon to meet those quotas or whatever else, like, that intent may come off as misgenuine. And I think that's important to call out. And that's just one specific example, obviously, and my personal take on it. But it did have me questioning, because it's like, well, how do you position yourself in these situations? So, but again, with what you're saying is basically coming up and having that open mind behind these things. And just, I think ultimately, and what I did in this case too, is like, I started asking other people, what's the right approach? What are questions? Like, I just want to make sure I'm doing this right, and that, that aligns with my values and how I want to support and everything else too. So I'm glad you call those things out, because sometimes it can get convoluted very quickly if we don't think outside of the box.
No, I think your story is like a perfect example of, or I'm sorry, your story about companies like kind of maybe like not genuinely supporting aspects. I think that's a great call out to that idea of like performative allyship, which is very much that. It's like, yeah, I'm here for you until I really need to be there for you, and then I'm actually not there for you. We see that a lot, especially with like corporate support.
Yes.
I mean, especially recently, I don't know if anyone kept up with the news, and like during June, which is often called or termed Pride Month for LGBTQIA plus folks, but lots of that performative allyship, and that's another thing. That's a perfect example of another pitfall, is people can go into the performative allyship mode where, like, yay, all about diversity and all about inclusivity, but your actions aren't really doing much in favor of that. And then when you do the last one I'll say is, when people do focus or prioritize diversity, getting people in, that's one challenge in and of itself. Like making an inclusive industry and workplace challenging because of all of the systemic issues that we still have. But once we do get people in, once we do make a diverse workplace or a diverse industry, how are we keeping people in and not pushing them out? And that is still a huge issue, because there's still so much harassment, misogyny, just microaggression. Like, and the data says this. The data says this in our IGDA developer satisfaction report. I want to say the last time I checked, it's like 1 in 5 non-minority men in the games industry have witnessed like inequities in the workplace. 1 in 3 minority men and 1 in 3 women witness inequity in the workplace. So we're still dealing with these issues that are pushing developers, pushing people out of the industry. So that's the other thing. People always think about getting people in, getting the room more diverse and inclusive. But then when it actually comes to retaining folks, that's still a huge problem.
Yeah. So that's a great segue here into this next question I have, which is, what are some ways companies can better support diverse environments?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of things, and I probably will miss like a few just because ADHD brain. But
it's so diverse,
that's
dynamic, and
exactly.
We won't hold you to it.
Certainly. Thank you. I appreciate it. As a sociologist, like as a trained researcher and like writer, you're always like, I don't know if you're familiar with like a literature review. When you're writing a report, you're like taking all the ideas from people, synthesizing it and saying like, okay, this is the conversation that everybody has contributed to. I always feel like I need to write a literature review before I like make any statement. Just, it's like ingrained in my body. But I would say first things first, of course, yes, it definitely depends on the company, the region, all of the social context of that. But in general, companies can provide education on diversity to employees. Studios can get consultants to come in and talk about diversity. And here's another thing. There have been like, I think some folks kind of get hesitant to like have other people come into their home and tell them or teach them about like what diversity means. But when you frame it as a conversation, like you're not having someone come in and say like, hey, you suck and you need to do a better job. I mean, like, as maybe that's kind of like the overall message at times, but ultimately it's like, hey, these are ways you can expand your diverse practices to attract more diverse developers, to attract a diverse pool of talent, to retain a diverse pool of talent. And that really can come from just having a consultant go through your policies, your practices, so companies can establish, stronger and more equitable hiring and talent recruitment policies, all literally from like the job description. Like, just as an example, if your job description has like gendered language or something like that, that can be off-putting to people. If you don't have like a lot of job descriptions will be like 8 years of experience in C sharp or something. I don't like whatever it is. 8 years. Okay, but what do they really want? What are you trying to do? Are you looking for someone who can do X, Y, Z? Or are you just looking for someone who's like played around for 8 years and like knows their stuff in C sharp? Because those are two very different things. Like, if you're really looking for somebody who has a very specific measurable outcomes that will likely relate to about 8 years, sure, of experience, then say the actual like leveled measured outcomes that you're looking for rather than just the generic like 8 years. Because here's the thing, a lot of times, especially folks who come from more diverse backgrounds, might not have that 8-year experience, but they do meet those qualifications. And a lot of times people don't apply to a job if they don't feel 100% qualified, especially diverse applicants. So getting down to the nitty gritty of your hiring practices is something that all studios could really benefit from. And we're actually, the IGDA, we're working on a paper right now called Hiring and Retaining Diverse Talent. And so this will be really explored more in depth in that paper.
Wow, some really great examples there too, especially like looking at different ways to really support diverse environments without necessarily like you said, it goes back to not necessarily bringing people in, but what are all the other ways of working on these things, and everything from like consultants and other things, and just having a better understanding that even just like, again, more dialogue and education about these things is probably going to be the best ways to start. And then that could be a great segue or building block to implementing those policies and everything.
Absolutely. And one thing I always like to tell like companies or really anybody that gives me a platform to talk about diversity, if supporting diversity is not in your budget, then it's not a priority. And you need to stop saying it's a priority if it really isn't. Because like really, when we think about it, when we think about our budgets are our financial priorities, right?
Right.
That's what we're spending our time, energy, effort, all of that money, everything. If supporting diversity is really not in there somewhere or encapsulated in aspects of like your line items, you really can't say it's a priority. Right. That's my opinion, at least, because it costs money to get consultants. It costs money to support the creation and sustenance of employee resource groups and really make them thrive so that they can build within the company and create community and have a stronger workplace, connection to the workplace, a sense of belonging. But all those things are supported financially, best supported financially. And if companies don't, add some funds to that, I say it's hard to say it's a priority when it's not in the budget.
I mean, just to call out, I'll be frank here, but making a half-assed effort isn't necessarily going to produce ideal or desirable results. And in fact, in some cases, I could see what you shared there could easily become a hidden pitfall. It's like, well, I have this intent of doing this, but I'm not fully backing it because of X, Y, or Z resources that I'm not putting into it. And therefore, it could, without discussing it further, it could potentially do more harm than good. Because it might be like, well, we're leading with this intent, but there's not a lot of clarity behind it. And now other ideas surface, and then it can create some negative outcomes potentially, or just uncertainty around what the true focus is of this. And I think it just goes back to what we were saying before, how some people, it might be coming off as disingenuine, even though that was never the case. It just never had that full backing that it needed to really make it be implemented properly. So I'm glad you
absolutely.
said that.
Oh, thanks.
So we talked a lot about some pitfalls and stuff, but I mean, I want to get a little bit more into like broadening horizons. What are some of the real benefits here? Because I know earlier on you were talking about how it can like being more diverse in the very most general sense, can help with stories and creativity and all these other things. So that said, let's dive into this a little bit deeper in terms of what are these real benefits of having a more diverse industry?
Yeah, I can definitely start with kind of like the stories and aspects of that. The IGDA hosts a conference called Pathfindings, which is a conference that elevates and really supports and showcases the voices of developers across the global South. And across, when I say the global South, I mean like Latin America, Africa, Middle East, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and indigenous populations around the world. And the conference brings together these developers who speak about the games that they're working on. And last year, our theme was folklore and storytelling. And there were so many stories, so many like folklore, myths, folklories that you've never heard of, you've never seen before. All because a lot of times people folks making the bigger games, the well-known games, AAA games, a lot of those decisions are going to be made by folks who are maybe not as culturally diverse as they could be. But when we open our doors, when we bring in new people, new ideas, new experiences, we have the ability to tap into some amazing stories that resonate with us despite our lack of experience or our lack of knowledge of that culture. But they're always still relevant because they tie back to our emotions of fear or happiness or joy or gratitude or grief. And the more stories, the more we can shine light on other regions of game development that are doing amazing work. They just don't often get the same access, the same support, the same elevation that a lot of other studios or games, mainstream games get. Often, like more indie titles, of course. And yeah, so I love that we can tap into this unknown world and really still connect and be truly like at a human level, just connect with people through the stories that they bring with them and the culture that they bring with them. So that's one thing. The other benefit of diversity, kind of very similar, is that we are a diverse world, and the more diverse our stories can be, the more connected people can feel to those stories, not just one demographic. I mean, hey, if you want to make a game that's for one demographic, go for it. You've got the right to do that. No one's saying you don't. What I'm saying is, how amazing is it to create a team that is diverse and that brings these unique perspectives and experiences to the table, and that can shape a game, that can shape a narrative, that can include and create relevant, relatable, and diverse characters, so that people all around the world can tap into or relate to a story or a character or a scene where you're having, breakfast. Like, so for you and me, maybe breakfast is like, I don't know. Well, I'm vegan, so I won't eat eggs, but just like generic, US American breakfast, like eggs and pancakes. But, if we regionalize or localize that for other regions and say, maybe it's like salmon and a soup or something, we can make things feel like home to other people. if we just bring the thought and the intentionality and the localization, of course, because localization does an amazing part of helping us reach broader audiences. But the point is, we can touch more people, we can connect more people, we can move more people. And I think that, for me, is my favorite part of games. I think I mentioned earlier with Final Fantasy XIV, games are fun, but games also impact us in ways we can't always explain. So yeah, I think that game aspect there is, I don't know. I could go on because I just love talking about that. So.
Well, and not only that, you did at one point mention about unique perspectives and stuff. And I'm thinking even from, an operation standpoint, within the teams, and regardless of whether it's a studio, an agency, whatever. I mean, just those perspectives and that diversity, those backgrounds and everything can probably really promote and elevate a lot of the critical thinking that goes on into the development,
Absolutely.
into the work, into every aspect of those projects. I mean, there's a quick story I'll share is from a previous episode with Masao Kobayashi, and one of his team members, is, which I think was an artist, was based in Mexico. They provided with some direction in terms of what that art would look like, just the basic setup. But what she added to it was elements that had some Mexican lore flair, if you will, that wasn't, there was no direction provided for that, but it created a really unique and very interesting look and feel that they were like, oh, well, this meets what our requirement, but it's something we weren't expecting. So it was a pleasant surprise to also another way to kind of show a story, even though show something visually, which no one ever anticipated. It was just, and again, it's like, that's just one tiny example of all the many different things in terms of how benefits can come out of this from just unique perspectives. So yeah, just to add to
thank you for sharing that. Yeah. That's amazing. I love that so much because it really does ring true. And I don't know, maybe it's not obvious. To me, it's like, it's so obvious. Like, the more experiences you have at the table, the more you can tap into knowledge and wisdom that can guide your project, that can guide your game, that can critically challenge assumptions that you have about the world. And I think a lot of people feel discomfort when someone challenges their view. I mean, obviously, in fact, social psychologists, I think, have said, when someone challenges your belief on something, you kind of dig deeper into that belief.
Yeah.
So it can be difficult for people to kind of see or broaden their perspective in that way. But oftentimes it can be about just the approach of exactly that, just kind of doing something without being asked, without challenging it. It's just you're bringing your thought and wisdom to the table.
Yeah.
And it fits. And I love that story. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course. And, I think it helps too, because I'm also curious in that light, and what you were just sharing a moment ago, but so what are some good ways that indie devs and studios can get involved with, fostering a more diverse industry?
Yeah, that's a great one. So first and foremost, I think just understanding what diversity in the industry means for you as an indie dev. Indie devs, depending on the size of their team, they're often solo or they're often in very small teams, 15 or less. And it's really easy for us to stay in our comfort zone. And if we don't already have kind of a diverse set of friends or peer network, just based on where we grew up, our social class, our neighborhood, etc., it can be difficult to get out of that comfort zone of just kind of going with what you know, because you'll often find people who feel comfortable maybe for you, and oftentimes comfort will be matched with people with similar backgrounds, similar experiences, and oftentimes that can relate to similar race, similar gender, similar et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So for indie devs, it's really important to just kind of be introspective and say, take a look around, look at your team and say, what voices are missing from the table? And how can we be better at branching out and being more inclusive, or prioritizing diversity, or like elevating the diversity that does already exist on the team. Maybe like, like I had mentioned, like hidden disabilities. That's people often don't see me as like a disabled person, but things like, so like kind of taking an analysis on your team, like what parts of your team can you elevate and support? And maybe you didn't even know that parts of your team had this like unique experience or an identity or whatever that impacts their life. And how can you support that and make them feel more included? How can you incorporate the elements of diversity into your game, into your content, into your characters, into your story, into like accessibility in your game? How can you make your game more accessible so that more people can play it? Whether that's with, like alternative controllers or other ways. Indie devs, it's like all about introspection. It's really about looking within and then looking around and trying to identify opportunities to support diversity.
And
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, speaking of opportunities, I want to go back to real quick the one point you made earlier, where it's about when you were saying, especially in a very practical, focused example here, you're talking about like, team composition. If you're looking for like your job requirements, right? And you're saying 8 years, but that 8 years can mean a lot of different things, but don't limit yourself just to that 8 years. If there's so much more potential if you open up that search, let's say to 6 years, but then also be specific and provide a little additional context or something that shows or has someone showcase other abilities, basically to solve problems. And by doing that, because if you're looking at with someone with the very specific requirements, you're inadvertently limiting yourself to what can now become very competitive for what you may or may not be looking for. But if you broaden that and look at other ways, it could just really open up that talent pool, regardless of where they're from. And then you start finding all the kind of like diamonds in the rough, and not that they were always diamonds, right? But just the fact of it just gives you so much more to work with. And I think it also helps, especially with those people who might want to be open to that, but aren't really funding or putting a lot of resources behind it. That's one great way to get started in those areas too, I would imagine, as it applies specifically to what your studio can produce in the long run, while being diverse. So
absolutely. To take that point even like a bit further, like even in addition to like intentionally identifying what it is you are looking for in hiring developers, branch out on where you look for developers. Like, post it on LinkedIn, post it on, post it on IGDA, career website, of course. But also go to communities where there are diverse developers. IGDA has, so many special interest groups, from people who are passionate about climate and credit policy to women in games and Latinx in games, Black in games, to folks who are all about production or programming or design or audio. Find where people are at and go there and share these opportunities. Because I guarantee you, just posting it on kind of like the mainstream, you're going to limit your search. You have to be intentional about the approach you take when you're really diversifying your team. Because again, it's so easy to just be in your comfort zone. It's so easy to just stay with what feels like the path of least resistance can often be the path of comfort. And that's not always beneficial.
Absolutely. Can't agree more. All right. I know we're coming on time here. We talked about a lot. That said, what are some, suggestions or tips that you could share with our listeners today based on what we discussed?
Yeah, no, that's a great, I love tips. I always like takeaways. Anytime I do a meeting, I got my notes. Number one, I would say be introspective. Ask yourself what voices might be missing from this conversation, especially when you're working on a character that is different from you or a story that you don't actually have a relationship with. Maybe ask yourself what voices might be good to have in this room and at this table in this conversation that could guide us to make this game or to make this character.
Nice.
The second would be bold. Indies, especially for indies, be bold, and be at the forefront of diversity, just like indies are at the forefront of so many things like new and engaging gameplay mechanics or narrative designs. Indies rule. Like I mean, I'm an indie too, so like, yeah, we have to be bold and be at the forefront of diversity. So whatever that means for you and your team, move forward boldly. And then with that said, it kind of goes hand in hand, but get out of your comfort zone. It's the one thing that I think we can all do to just step outside of our comfort zone, outside of our bubble, and connect with a world that is unknown to us at times, and really, really connect at that human level. But it starts with getting out of the comfort zone and branching out and meeting as many people as you can. And yeah, I think those are three, right? Yeah. 3.
No, great ones too. And can't thank you enough for sharing that. So with that said, as we get ready to close, couple things. Well, in a moment, I'd love for your people to know how they can reach out to you, how they can find more about IGDA. But before we do that offer we were talking about in the beginning, what is it specifically? What do you have in store for our listeners today?
All right. So the IGDA, the International Game Developers Association, is a 501c6 nonprofit professional association that supports and empowers all game creators around the world. We are a membership-based organization, and our membership professional association is really, really affordable compared to like a lot of other professional associations. But today I have even a more affordable option for folks here. That's a 15% discount for folks who want to join the IGDA. And if you join the IGDA at igda.org/membership, you can get a 1-year membership to IGDA for 15% off using the code IGDA-IGM15. That's IGDA-IGM15. And yeah, I really hope you join the organization and contribute to discussions and join our communities and get involved in the industry if you're not already.
Yeah, well, I can't thank you enough for providing such a generous offer for the listeners. And folks, I'm sure you're already familiar with the organization, but even if you're not, it is something that in terms of what we talked about today, support, and various capacities, there's just really so much value in there, especially for anyone who's having a hard time getting you out of your comfort zone. That's probably one of the best places you can go to do that. I'm not here to talk about it forever, but I'm sure I can. But no, seriously think about it. And again, it's a really generous offer. That said, Jakin, how can people connect with you? Where can they get all their info?
Yeah. I'm pretty much at on Instagram and Twitter, Threads, and all that. Like Dr. Jakin Vela, DrJakinVela. That's V as in Victor. People can connect with me on social. Of course, my email, you can email me directly at jakin@igda.org if you want to get in touch or discuss anything. And then for IGDA, igda.org. And if you want to learn more about me, you can go to jakinvela.com and learn more about my background. I haven't updated my website in a while, so don't judge me. But thank you so much for allowing me to come and connect to your audience and with you. I had such an amazing time, and we talked about such awesome topics that I'm very grateful for your time today.
Of course. Well, we really appreciate you being on the show. So thanks for making the time for us today, too.
Absolutely. Well, I hope everyone has a good time zone.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saab for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.